Trying again, talking loudly. So yeah, I am definitely a creative. I come from a creative background, but I've really kind of come full circle. So with the theme of Kismet this month, I sort of wanted to talk about some of the things that have taken me on unexpected paths, and I guess the learnings that I've gotten from those along the way. So this is life lessons from a born creative through other industries. So I guess, as I mentioned, I've had a really non-linear career path. So some of that was on purpose, and some of that sort of happened to me. And so it's been a really interesting journey navigating through all of those different spaces. I am a really logical thinker. So yeah, as Nicole mentioned in my bio, I'm definitely like left brain, right brain, creative, but also quite data driven. I am really scientific. I really like stats and facts and numbers and sort of understanding things from a really logical perspective, which sometimes in the creative world I think is seen as a bit of a curse, and it certainly took me a long time to understand that that was something that can actually be really beneficial. So it doesn't stop you from being creative, but it can actually be really beneficial along the way to help you rationalize things, or to sell things in or get points across and understand kind of bigger picture. So with, sorry, I've like clicked across. Anyway, that's the next slide. So I guess with that logical brain, the idea of Kismet for me is sort of bordering on a bit woo-woo. Like, I'm not into astrology or sort of the idea that someone has set out a path for you and that is definitely what's going to happen. But I do believe that we are all born with certain traits, and I guess skills and things that make us better at some things and less good at others. So I think something that's been really important on my journey is learning what things to lean into and what things are going to make what I do more successful and what things are just not for me. So wrapping that up, I feel like the Kismet vibe for me is to control your destiny, learn to follow the light. So it's about finding that thing, that the things that spark your interest and the things that like capture your attention and you're like, I want to do more of that. Like, that's really cool. Like, being able to identify what's good along the way. So I feel very fortunate to have always had, I guess, enough self-awareness to know what I like. And I think a lot of people who are creative are just kind of born with that. Like, you like making things, you like doing things, you like exploring ideas. And that's really powerful. And I think for creative thinkers, it's often hard to imagine that you wouldn't have that all the time. But like, my brother is the exact opposite of me. And like, he was in the military for most of his career, and he's just like straight down the line. It's black or white, like things just are what they are. And he just can't imagine being like, I'm just exploring this, I'm just trying that. I don't know what it's going to be, but I'm going to find out along the way. And so I guess having that that spark and that creative energy has always been a really powerful tool to be aware of. And so I guess coming around to where I am now with Acid Flwrs, AF has been my, I guess, most successful creative venture to date. I developed it in sort of mid-2020, launched it at the start of last year, spent a lot of time hustling last year to get it off the ground, and then this year, I guess, reaping the benefits of all of that hustle and doing some really exciting projects, which is super fun. But it also wouldn't have happened if in 2020 I wasn't dating a graffiti artist and just kicking about with paint, and I wouldn't have been in contact with that person if I wasn't doing a test shoot for a little animation with my friend Seb in front of the Bondi Beach wall where this guy had a mural. And then I wouldn't even be in Sydney if I hadn't been working for Airtasker. And I wouldn't be working for Airtasker if I hadn't been fired from what I thought was my dream job in London. So, it's the way things go, right? So just to go through a bit of work, I work as a still life stylist and a product stylist. Just some nice pictures. So I grew up in Perth, and like I said, kind of always identified as being a creative, but the school I went to, you either became a doctor or a lawyer or an engineer or a wife, and none of those things were particularly interesting to me. So I kind of fell into doing costuming at the West Australian Academy of Performing Arts, which is an incredible institution, and you work bloody hard to get full-scale productions off the ground. So it taught me a lot about the importance of working with a team and deadlines and working until the job is done, which I think is a really powerful thing in creative, because you're out on like 14-hour shoots, or you're on deadlines all night, and it's good to know that doing the work can get a result. But sort of got to the end of that, and I just was really obsessed with fashion, and I think because I still didn't know where I wanted to land and what I wanted to do, fashion just felt like the easiest expression. So I dress pretty classically creative now. I'm like black and sneakers every day, but back in the day, like hectic, like you would not recognize me. I was like blue hair, face piercings, like I was always in like a look, and I was like Harajuku one day and like vintage the next day, and it was like heels and hats and like the whole situation, which is like way too much work for now. But I think that's just where my creativity was getting channeled into, and I couldn't see any other space apart from fashion that I wanted to end up in. So went to Melbourne, studied at RMIT, did fashion there, was always doing bits and pieces, and kind of like, I thought that was it. I was like, I'm done. Like, I'm in Melbourne, I'm living the dream, I'm working in fashion, this is me forever. Like, I don't need to do anything else. So good. And then in 2012, I got a call from my parents, and so my father had been unwell for a number of years, and it was like February 2012, and I called up and they're like, look, now's the time, like chemo stopped working, so if you're coming home, now's the time. So packed up my life like in a matter of days, left my job, left my partner, left my house, and went back to Perth, where it's somewhere that I never expected to go back to, which I think a lot of people from, I guess, smaller cities can understand. Like, no digs on Perth, like the beaches are amazing, it's got a beautiful community, but it doesn't necessarily have the same opportunities to explore a creative career. So I went back there and I was like, okay, cool. And that became a really transformative couple of months in my life. So I was going to give you some more pictures. Not really relevant, but sure. So, actually, I do have a bit of this. So, track through some pictures. That's all just styling work. Okay, so my, I guess, next bit of stories is like the first transformative piece in my life. So, yeah, going back to Perth was just a really life-changing time for kind of two reasons. So one, I'd left my life and gone to do palliative care for my father, which is, if anyone's sort of been through that situation, it's, it's very humbling. It's, I think you really understand what's important to you, and it's a real sort of change in values coming from this world of fashion where everything was very, bright and shiny and superficial, and it's like, yes, it was fun, but it wasn't really purposeful for me, or I wasn't finding purpose in it. Coming back to do, this physical care of someone that I'm obviously very close to, and that was a quite stressful time. And I think coming from purely creative world, having no particular traumas in my life before that, I didn't have a lot of coping strategy. So one day I woke up in Perth and I was like, I just need to run. Like, I need to go running. And this is from the girl who was like in a Harajuku outfit and heels every day, like was the least sporty person you've ever met. But I was like, need to run. So I'd like get up and like literally run like a block and then like walk to the park and then run for like 20 meters and like keep walking. And I was like, okay, I feel kind of calm from this. This is good, do that again. And just kept doing that. It was a very organic process, but that really taught me to, I guess, control the creative energy and I guess the creative anxiety that I'd always felt, which being further down the track, I now understand is kind of a force of having a creative brain and a logical brain and not always being able to find a sort of clear pathway through those thought processes. So running really did change my life. It's definitely made me a better creative. And so that sort of kicked off a journey that was incredibly unexpected. So coming back to Perth and sort of being on hold from fashion, it was back in 2012, so there wasn't a lot happening in the sustainable space in Australia. Everything was like quite fast fashiony. It didn't feel like anyone was doing anything particularly useful in the industry. There was stuff happening overseas, but I wasn't in a position to chase that at the time. So I was like, you know what, like it's not inspiring me. I've had this huge change in values. I've had this sort of transformative experience where I've understood that there's a whole different world out there that I haven't experienced. And I was like, you know what, fashion, I'm done. Like, you had 25 years of my life, that's it, like, no more. So I left the fashion industry and I went to study physio. So spent 2.5 years as a mature age student with a whole lot of very sporty 18-year-olds. Quite different, like rocking into lectures where everyone's in like gym clothes and you're there like learning how to do, manual handling and helping people do rehab. Again, an incredibly humbling experience. I was fortunate to do like work experience in the emergency department and with people who had severe spinal injuries. Like it's a phenomenal industry, and the people who work there are incredibly caring. But I think while I was there, I had this really interesting perspective shift where I was like, I've come from a world that is completely different to what everyone here knows. And so I had a really different perspective on that industry. And that sort of was a real wake-up moment for me. Just understanding that creative skills don't just mean fashion or like, creating a tangible, beautiful thing. It actually means knowing how to present ideas and to communicate information and to make sure that people can, I guess, engage with what you put in front of them. So having that lens on the scientific world and the clinical health world was really eye-opening for me. So I kind of was going down this pathway of physio, and at the same time, because I need to do things with my hands and the creative was ticking along in the background, was doing a lot of flat laying. Again, we're back in 2014 maybe, where flat lay was a big thing. So I'd just be like doing my outfits every morning and like picture on Instagram, and I like things to be neat, so they were always really neat. And then that sort of kicked off into becoming a bit of like Perth's go-to flat lay stylist. So that sort of kicked off my product styling career without really meaning to. But still doing physio, still kicking along. I was like, great, cool, gonna be a physio, that's great. Done. Again, creative's just for fun now. And sort of moving along, still doing running, got really involved in the running community. And I guess seeing the benefit of having a network and a community of people who are doing things like regularly together, which I don't know that I'd experienced in creative world necessarily until that point. And then ticking along, physio was fine. I was working as a stylist as well. That was really fun, all good. But then life happened, was in a really disastrous relationship, and that ended in a very unfun way. And I was like, something's got to give. Like, I need to not be doing one of these things right now. So I decided that physio could wait because it wasn't going anywhere. So was also about to turn 30, and I was like, oh, I'm going to lose my visa if I don't use it now. So went off to London, and I was like, just going to hang out, just going to do a couple of months of freelancing and all good fun. And then I'll come back and I'll finish my degree and I'll be a physio. And then while I was there, was like freelancing, doing bits and pieces, had the opportunity to do some consulting at the Royal College of Art's Innovation Department, which is called Innovation RCA. Really incredible space. A lot of institutions have them now. I mean, like lots of banks have them, lots of unis have them. There's lots of independent ones, but it's really like a startup hub to help people develop ideas and get them commercially out into the world. And so while I was there, I met a phenomenal lady called Dr. Carmen Hyosa, who developed a textile called Pinatex. And she was incredibly energetic, incredibly inspiring. She did a PhD in her 60s and developed this textile, which is made from the fibre from the waste leaves of pineapple harvesting. So not the fruit itself, but from the plants. So a really incredibly inspiring product. It's something that gives an additional income stream to farming communities. It was utilising a waste, and she turned this into a textile that was a vegan alternative to leather. So really interesting use case. And this just for me took me right back to that sort of initial quitting fashion moment where I was like, I hadn't found anything that inspired me in that space then, but now I was like, I can't work on anything else. This is so cool. It's literally changing the world. Sign me up. So started working for them, was like, I'll do bits and pieces, cool, help them out, and then I'll come back to Perth and finish my degree. So stayed with them for a few months, came back to Perth, was just working remotely. And I was like, okay, cool, like time difference for London to Perth, not great. Doing a lot of calls at 11 p.m, which is less than ideal. And I was like, this is great, but I need to hand over. I've helped them out, I've done my piece, I'll just hand over. And while I'm doing that, I'm still running, still doing bits and pieces, and then was incredibly fortunate to have the opportunity to go over to Milan with Nike for a project called Breaking 2, where they were trying to break the marathon in 2 hours. So they had 3 runners running around the Formula 1 track, and they just took a bunch of runners from around the world to go and support and get around it. Super fun. And so Nike being Nike, they're like, oh, you want to extend your trip? So fine, go to London on the way back. And I'm like, great, gonna go, hand over to Pinatex, whoever's in the office, I will let you know where we're at and you can take over from here. And the day before I fly in, they call up and they're like, hey, just checking for the meeting tomorrow. I'm like, yep, coming in, like, make sure you're there because I'm handing over. And they're like, cool, we're offering you a job. So then I was like, oh man, like my plans. So went to London, took the job, came back, went back, packed up my life, and then stayed in London for a couple of years working on that. So again, I guess like the threads through all of this is really the things that have been world changing are the things that I've found really inspiring. And like a vegan alternative to leather doesn't really have anything to do with physio, but if I hadn't been a runner, which is what inspired me to do physio in the first place, I wouldn't have ended up in London with Pinatex. So it's just like the waves of life, I guess, can be really unexpected but really interesting if you let them. And so then I stayed with Pinatex for about 1.5 years. That was my first experience of a real startup that was experiencing massive growth and all the challenges of a small team that were managing a lot of different things. Don't know if anyone's worked with startups before, but they're pretty hectic. People who have amazing skills in some areas and no skills in other areas, so it's all a bit haphazard. Got to a point with that one where we had a lot of management, but no one steering the ship, and me and being a very logical thinker, I ask a lot of questions. So in startup land, you get to a point and you're like, okay, you're disrupting the team, time to go. So I was out of there quite unexpectedly again. And then because it's London and it's startup land, had a number of connections who were like, okay, there's stuff going here, there's stuff going there, like you could do this, you could do that. This is when Airtasker was just launching in London for the first time. And so I joined their team over there, which again, huge industry leap into tech, which I'd always sort of been around, sort of growing up digital, but had never worked specifically for a tech company. Can't say that I ever thought that that was an interesting thing, but tech is so cool. Like there's so much opportunity, there's so much potential to do interesting things. Lots of potential to do not great things as well. But that was a really interesting space to learn more about. So was with Airtasker in London for about 6 months, and then my visa was up and I was like, not willing to hover on the sponsorship again. So I came to Sydney and joined them here. And then that sort of kicked off a real thought process about like, cool, I've come back to Sydney, I've come back to Australia, like do I want to be working in tech? Is this the path? Like I've sort of ended up on this, but is that the direction that I want it to be going, or is that just where it's ended up? Oh, sorry, we've repeated that one. And so then I kind of got to a point where I was like, all right, what do I want to be doing? What do I want to be working on? And despite all of the waves through other industries, it really came back to doing good things with good people, particularly in the creative space. So I started doing a lot of test shoots, a lot of collabs, a lot of just like working with the network of people that I knew to do fun things. And I think that's such an important part of making opportunities happen. Like you never know where your personal project might go. So this is sort of where Acid Flowers turned into a thing. So in 2020, in lockdown, like I think we all were getting a bit bored of the same old everything, and then lots of opportunity to just experiment and do fun stuff that isn't necessarily for a client or for a project. So I've always used flowers in my work as a stylist a lot, and I just like customizing stuff. So it's like, I don't want things to be just out of the box. Like it's got to have a tweak, it's got to be this. Like make it suit the space, suit the mood. And so AF was just going to be for a photo shoot, like just an experiment. And then sort of landing on this aesthetic, realized that it could be, I guess, something more than just a shoot. So kept working on the process and kept working on sort of how to turn one flower that you've made in your backyard into something that you can put out into the world. I was very fortunate to have had really great pickup from the local community. So lots of, I guess, opportunities to do events and things that would get it seen by people. But also I think the background that I had through tech and through working on other things has really helped develop what it is as a brand. I had the opportunity to work with Mariam Sadiq, who is a phenomenal fashion designer here in Sydney last year for her runway show. And that feels like a very Kismet moment as well, because her stylist is someone that I studied with at WAPA in my first year back in Perth. And we've always stayed connected, and it just sort of came together that she was styling this show and she was like, the colors are amazing, like we have to get the flowers in with that. And like many things in fashion, it reminded me that a lot happens last minute, a lot of time and energy is put in for something that lasts for like 10 minutes on the runway, but it was super fun. Didn't make me want to go back to the fashion world. But yeah, the coat on the side, I was like painting on my balcony. It was before I had a studio. And like, I just live in Chippendale with a very small balcony. So I'm like on my balcony at like 11 o'clock the day before with this like one sample coat. I'm like, don't fuck it up. Like there's only one. Then earlier this year, had the opportunity to, I guess, expand the AF aesthetic into space beyond flowers. So this was a bit of a Kismet moment in the sense that the plan for this exhibition was to have a room full of flowers, but the exhibition was in Perth, and we all know WA likes to lock down their borders at the drop of a hat. So this is with a musician called Taku, who is like a producer but also a photographer and creative. He was launching an album earlier this year and took over this like awesome heritage apartment building and did different aesthetics in each of the rooms. So I was gonna go over and fill the room full of flowers, but that then couldn't happen. So we had to find a way to bring the AF vibe into the space without me being on ground. So ended up painting like a whole dining setting and like chairs and table and a bar cart and all these bits and pieces here in Sydney, and they put it on a container and shipped it over and rebuilt it over there, which I didn't get to see it in life, but the photos were cool. And I think that, I guess, really taught me that it doesn't just have to be one thing, like your aesthetic or your vibe can roll out into other spaces. And if the WA borders hadn't been locked down, then I would have just gone over and done a room full of flowers, which would have been cool, but it's also, it wouldn't have pushed me further as a creative. So thanks the Kismet of WA borders. Mark McGowan. And that's just some flowers. So I suppose what AF represents to me is very much a fresh perspective. And so what I've really learnt through weaving through all these different industries, and like from that first moment of walking into a physio lecture with a bunch of sporty people and I'm like, oh, yeah, I come from fashion, like I don't care about football at all. Was just that it's not a bad thing, like having that crossover of worlds and having a different perspective to, you know, the person you're in a meeting with or the, you know, someone you're working on something with, having that lens that sparks a different view or something else is always a blessing, not a curse. So I think the rolling of life and the things that happen that aren't necessarily what you planned or aren't what you think they're going to be are not a bad thing. So to just circle it back, to control your destiny, learn to follow the light. So, thanks, guys. Marie has a question.
I'm concerned about the flowers. Can they still breathe?
They can. They last for, I mean, my party line is like 2 to 3 weeks, but I often have them in my house for like 5. Like they last as long as they normally would.
Do you use a specific base of spray or something?
Yeah, so I use like a variety of artist paints, so it's fairly standard paint.
So they're hand painted and sprayed?
Yeah, there's so different techniques with, so that one is, it's like a hydro dip vibe, so it's like marbling, which is a historic technique that has been used for thousands of years. Used to be on like the inside of books, and obviously really beautiful on fabrics. So that's like a standard marble, and then these ones are oversprayed first with the print over the top. Any other questions? Claire. I was going to ask the same question about the, like, how did you even discover it, and
Yeah,
you know,
I mean,
I guess like how did you kind of know that it was going to be a bigger thing? Like, did you just have a sense, or did your friends see them and go, they're amazing? Like, how did that come about? It was a thing where landing on that style, like, I just was amazed that it wasn't already done. I think that was kind of the moment I was like, cute, fun, like, love it, but I was like, it's definitely out there, like, for sure. And then did a massive, I was like, I'm pretty up with like what's happening in the kind of like floral art world. Like haven't actually really seen it. I was like, troll Pinterest, troll Insta, troll all the hashtags, like look for everything. And I was like, it's not there. Like this is weird.
wow.
So yeah, it was just, and again, it was just for the sake of doing something fun. I was like, I follow a number of floral artists who do really beautiful work, but I never want to be referential in what I'm doing. So I was like, how can I do something that is customizing something natural without it being someone else's style. So it was just playing around with paint and landing on an aesthetic that happened to not be out in the world already. Hi.
I just wonder what your approach to time is, because
Ooh.
you've done so much stuff. How do you trust that you're going to come across the theme or the amount of things in the time that you kind of...
That is a good question. I go through periods of like hustle, which actually, no, I shouldn't use that word because that's like, Gary Vee ruined that for everyone. I think I'm fortunate that I get a lot of energy from working on things that inspire me. So if I'm engaged in something, I just want to do that, and I will do that until I find the solution or the way, and I don't want to do anything else until I'm through that. So there's definitely been periods where I've been working very long hours, you know, for months at a time, which I would say is not sustainable. Like there was a period when I was doing physio where I had like 11, over a 2-week period, I had 11 exams and 3 like Christmas gift guide photo shoots, which if anyone's ever seen one of those in a magazine, it's like 100 products. Like it's so much, I had just like spreadsheets for days, like, and I kind of got through that and I was like, can't do this for life. Like that's a terrible idea. So yeah, I think I'm a lot better at managing time to have balance now. There were periods where I didn't, but yeah, now because I'm more conscious of what I'm good at and what I'm able to get value from, I don't waste time doing the things that I just know I suck at. Like I'm shit at accounting, so you know, someone else does that. Or like last year, sort of learning that driving around delivering flowers myself was not a good use of my time. Like useful because now I understand the logistics and how hard it is, but you know, that is now something that I divert to a resource that is not me. So yeah, I think it's just like learning what delivers the most value from your time and making time for yourself to recharge as well, because that's super important. Hi, sorry, or can we work through this way?
There,
Over there.
And then,
Hi.
and then at the back, but here first.
Okay. Yeah. Ooh,
Hey.
wait, hi.
It sounds like you're really good at sort of letting go of one thing and trusting and moving on to the next. Like, is there anything that, like, I'm just like, how do you do
Yeah.
that? Because I sort of will be doing something and it doesn't work out how I planned in my head, and I kind of hold on
Yep.
a bit too long.
Yeah, interesting.
Like, what do you
Um,
know what I'm asking?
yeah, no, I do.
What's the process?
I think for me, it's knowing that like perfect is not a thing. So, and actually that's been a really good learning from tech, and I probably didn't appreciate that as much until I was out of creative, because I think we put a lot of focus on like, the design was like this, it's meant to be like this, like I'm not achieving what I thought it was going to be. But a really huge thing in tech is learning from failure. So the idea that you build something or you do an experiment and it didn't work out the way you thought it would, but if you can then like do a retro on that and be like, okay, what did I do? What worked? What didn't work? How can I change my approach next time to make it more favorable or make it work the way I wanted it to? Then it's easier to move past that point, that one thing. So yeah, I think for me, it's like, regardless of the outcome, you've learned something along the way. So what can you then do next time to make it better? No worries.
And a question at the back.
Go through.
So I've got 2 questions.
Sure.
The first one is like your career interest in taking you around the world to live and work in different cities. So I'm sort of curious how you measure up being a creative person in Sydney with being a creative person in other cities.
Yeah, interesting. I think Sydney's good. Like there's enough energy and enough opportunity to explore almost anything. I would comment that Australia has limitations just because of how far we are away from everywhere else. So as a creative, if you haven't worked overseas, I would highly recommend it. Like there's just whopping budgets and opportunities around every corner, so it's a shame not to explore that. But I don't think Sydney is lacking. Like, I don't think I could have done Acid Flowers in Perth. I just don't think there would have been enough network or enough opportunity to get it out there. But Sydney's has been a really good basis for doing that. Saying that, there's lots of things I want to do with it in cities that have other spaces and more budget, so we'll also explore that. But no, I think like Sydney is a good vibe. Like, there's definitely enough scope to do different things.
The second question was, what does a typical day look like for you?
Oh,
Do you follow her on Instagram? You can see it.
I do post a lot of my day. I always start with exercise, whether that's going for a run or just doing some light weights at home, because I just need that. Like, I don't know how I functioned as a creative person before that. Like, just cannot focus my thoughts without just doing a little bit of movement. I live down the road, so I usually come and get a coffee from Brickfields, and then I am either going to my studio to do flowers or running around sourcing for shoots, so I'll be like all over the city. If it's Wednesday, I go to the flower market disgustingly early, which is like, it's fun, but it's also a bit heckers. There's like forklifts everywhere. And then any time that isn't running around time is like planning and doing decks and proposals and just project management stuff. But good balance. I also really like food, so I do a lot of eating and drinking around Sydney. So if you want hot tips, I've got all of them. Hi.
Where do you get your inspiration?
Oh, lots of places, mostly walking around. Like, I just like outside. I love the stack of basketballs. I like weird shadows. I really like industrial design. So like, I love the airport in Sydney because like the red stripes on the tarmac are really cool. I just like, every time I'm just like, yes, Melbourne doesn't have those. No good. Yeah, just like random outside things mostly. I mean, obviously like addicted to Insta like everyone is, but I don't like to be inspired by, I guess, other creative work. Like I want there to be a story to something. And I suppose for styling particularly, not necessarily for, like flowers, colours just come from, yeah, like the tarmac at the airport and like a railing next to a road cone. But for styling, I think this has come from studying costuming and being very aware of like the purpose of objects and things. So it's like if you're doing a film set, you're doing a theatre, like a show, everything that ends up on stage has been thought through, and you think about what it represents and you think about why it's there. So for me, styling always has to have that story. Like I don't just want like pretty for the sake of pretty. I want to understand why something, like what it's telling you. So yeah, inspired by stories and road cones.
Is there maybe one more question and then we'll have to wrap it up?
Probably the big movie. I'm just wondering, like, does intuition play any part in this? Like, when you came across the flowers, did you just go, I know, or was it just?
Yeah, I think I guess aesthetic intuition is probably a thing. Again, from having a background that has spanned like theatre, so like costume and then fashion, and then like I've always been interested in art, so I have quite a broad knowledge of art and like the history of fashion design and clothing. So I think I have a broad knowledge of sort of things that have been done and things that haven't been done. So yeah, like certainly the first Acid Flowers, I was like, this is definitely cool. This is unusual. I was like, must have been done though. But yeah, so I guess the intuition was sort of there, but I didn't trust it. So, but we got there in the end.
Guys, that's all we have time for. Give Claire another round of applause.
Thank you.